Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome in, listener, to another episode of the podcast. I'm excited to be here with you again this week. And today's topic is something that it's kind of crazy that we haven't talked about this before because it feels so omnipotent and everybody is dealing with it. And I wish I had like an extra nickel for every time we talk about this topic with my coaching clients in the group and stuff like that. And that is screen time. Oh my gosh. How much time do you spend trying to limit screen time, manage screen time, monitor screen time? You know, how many times a day do you threaten to take away screen time or maybe actually do take away screen time? Like, screens are like the bane of a parent's existence. And it feels like we have this like love-hate relationship with them. You can't live with them. You can't live without them, blah, 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 blah. So we are going to talk about screens today. I'm going to kind of start my conversation talking about screens from the perspective of younger kids, and then we're going to kind of morph it into older kids. So stay with me, whatever age kids you have, this is going to be useful for you. My confession this week is to just say I am right there in the thick of it with all of you guys because I have totally let screen rules slide. And my daughter, my 14-year-old, pointed out to me just a couple days ago, she's like, this is just total crap. When I was my brother's age, who's 9, when I was 9, we had no screens at all during the week. We only had screens on the weekends. You know, what the heck? My brother is getting screens like every day after school. And she's right. She's totally right. We have completely slacked off on screen rules in our family, and I don't like it at all. And so I'm hoping I have an ulterior motive in recording this podcast episode for you all today. One is to help you, but my ulterior motive is to help me put down the hammer and change the situation around here with screens. So hopefully by recording this and putting it out there, I'm holding myself accountable and going to like kind of light a fire under my ass to actually do something about this stuff. So that's my confession for you. And then you know it's extra fun when you're getting called out by your kid and that you have absolutely no argument in your defense. That's where I'm at today. So there you go. Just in case you thought that by being a parent coach, I like am never, you know, screwing up, getting called out, making mistakes. It's all happening. Okay. So here is the spiel about screens. Let's talk about it. So, and I kind of want you to think about your own kiddo around this. Screens, we know. I'm going to tell you what you already know, but you don't want to hear. And you wish there would be a study that would come out that would prove this wrong so that we could all relax around screens. But unfortunately, that study has yet to come out. So, what we know, whether we like to admit it or not, is that screens are not great. We know it. Okay. We know it. We know it as adults. Like, my phone is not great. Like, I got a message from a client yesterday who was like, turns out accidentally leaving my phone in the car is the key to my productivity. I did like all the things that we talked about in our session this week. I already did them today. And it's because I couldn't find my phone. And I coincidentally had the exact same experience. I had picked up my phone yesterday morning and out of the blue, like out of nowhere, it just didn't work. And I was like, oh, great. Okay, I'm gonna have to take it to the store, but I don't have time right now. So I just kind of put it down and did my whole morning. And then when I went to go pick it up to take it to the store, it all of a sudden worked again. But either way, whatever. Both my client and I wound up having one of the more productive mornings of our lives because we didn't have our screens with us. So we as adults, we don't even need a study to tell us. We can feel it ourselves that our screens are not great for us and they have negative impacts on us. We can see in our kids that they don't do great with screens. And so let's talk about that. I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty science and neurology and stuff around screens, but I will say that in general, I see screens doing one of two things for kids, two kids. Some kids are totally zombified when they're watching a screen. I have two kids like that. Um, and they could literally watch screens. Like if I let them, they would never get bored of it. They would never reanimate. They would just literally be in this sort of like hibernating state the entire time that a screen was on. And I am like that myself also. I cannot go out for dinner to a sports bar because even though I might have absolutely no interest in what is on the screen, if there is a TV, I can't not watch it. I'm like incapable. It like hijacks my brain. So that is one way that we see kids get to total turn into zombies when they're watching TV. There's other kids that see might seem even unfazed by watching TV, or I'm saying TV screens, your iPad, your phone, whatever, it doesn't matter. Um, and video games is in this mix too. So anything that I say today, just generalize it to screens. Okay. Um, some kids, when they're in front of a screen, they might seem like they're not super phased by it, but I actually think that these kids are the ones who are getting more like stirred up and activated by TV, but we don't see it as activation. We see it as like, oh, look, my kid is able to watch TV, but they're still active. They might lose interest. They come back to it, blah, 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 blah. Something's still going on inside there. Okay. And then let's talk about what happens when we turn the screen off. This is where we really see the shit hit the fan. And that is true whether your kid is a zombie kid or an activated kid. Once the screen is off, there's usually like a sort of re-entry period. And for a lot of kids, they are very dysregulated. They might just be kind of disoriented or like almost like dazed, like, whoa, whoa, what day is it? Where am I? But there are a lot of kids that get almost like wired. And I will say I also work with a couple of, not more than a couple of families who their kids don't just get wired, they almost get completely dysregulated to the point of being almost like violent or I don't want to say hysterical, but just like almost like throwing a tantrum the second the screen is off. And it doesn't matter how much warning you give. It doesn't matter if you're doing it super gently or if you're like, oh, 8 o'clock, time to turn off the TV, and you just turn it off abruptly. It doesn't matter. It's like their reentry period is like violent, almost like violent inside their body. It's very, very brutal almost, to re-enter reality after a screen. So you don't need me to tell you that screens aren't great for kids. Like I said, we know it ourselves, we experience it ourselves, and we see it very obviously in our children. So it's time for us to stop pretending like it's not a problem. It is a problem. And I want you to ask yourself, if you're struggling with a kiddo who's too aggressive, that's the word I've been looking for, aggressive. If you're struggling with a kiddo who's too aggressive, start noticing a little bit more, like, do they seem more or less aggressive? Not when they're on the screen, but when you turn the screen off. Do they have a hard time? And can you tell that the more screens, can you see a correlation with the amount of time they spend on a screen and the amount of time they spend, or the degree to which they are maybe dysregulated, more aggressive, etc. Because I have multiple families that I help whose kids, it's almost like clockwork. It's almost like you're starting to see, every time my kid eats strawberries, they get a rash around their mouth. It's like, every time my kid is on a screen, they're like, the Tasmanian devil the second the screen is turned off. And I'm starting to see things in school. I'm starting to see things between them and friends. It is very, very hard to kind of take our blinders off to this and lift that veil and look at this really. But there is a very big correlation for a lot of families between the level of aggression in their kids and the level of or amount of time they spend on screens. And we can even get into the weeds about like what kind of stuff they're watching on screens, whether it's interactive or passive. Is it a video game versus watching a show? It doesn't like, let's not get into the weeds about that. Like, if your child is showing signs of aggression, my first suggestion for you is to look at their screen use amount of time, start looking at patterns, really take a close look at that. Okay. Because the bottom line is that screens are like a drug. They're like crack. I tell this to my clients all the time. Screens are like crack, and we are feeding crack to our children, and then we are acting mystified as to why they behave like crack addicts. Like, why do they behave like drug addicts? They have exactly the behavior. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not just saying this hyperbolically. I work with families who have kids struggling with addiction and substance abuse. The behavior is the same. The way that our kids behave around screens, let's be honest, the way that we behave around screens is exactly the same as somebody who has a substance abuse and addiction problem. It is exactly the same. And so when we start looking at this, like, I want you to imagine that instead of screens, we're talking about literally drugs. And you're coming to me saying, well, what's the best way for me to give my kid drugs so that they will, you know, be able to use drugs in a way that's like not too problematic? Of course, you would never come to me and say that. And of course, if you did, I would say the answer is no drugs. Your kid should not be on drugs. Of course. But we don't realize that that's kind of what we're saying with screens. And I literally, of course, I would never do this, but there was like a year where I was like, I kind of want to like charge a surcharge for my clients. So like the first time we talk about screens, that's included in your coaching package. You're going to get this information from me that I'm telling you right now. I mean, obviously, we go a lot deeper and we come up with a plan that works specifically for your family and it's realistic and all this stuff. But the bottom, like the background information is the same. So you're going to get this stuff for me. That's on the house. It's included in your coaching. But if we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 conversations about managing screens in your house, I'm charging you extra for those because the answer is always going to be the same. And what is really happening when I have these multiple conversations with my clients around screens is I really try to help you see it as like, you came to me and asked me how to help you give your children drugs. We came up with this realistic plan. We understanding that drugs are bad. Okay. Drugs are bad. So we don't give drugs to our kids, but you're telling me that you're definitely going to give drugs to your kids. So let's come up with a plan that minimizes the impact of drugs to your kids. So we did that. We came up with the plan. And now we're spending like the rest of your coaching time with me trying to come up with all these various scenarios in which it would be okay or different or the better way for you to deliver drugs to your kids. I'm taking this analogy so far because it is actually literally insane how we parent around screens. I'm not going to sit here and tell you something super unrealistic, which is like your kids should just never have screens. If you're able to do that and ready to do that, then hallelujah, go with God. I'm so happy for you. And I wish we all were, riding that gravy train. But I also know that like maybe 1 in a million parents are going to do that. And instead, we're looking at, okay, what kind of boundaries can we set up around screens? But I want to point out to you that the craziest thing is that we are constantly playing whack-a-mole with screens with our kids. When you think about it, screens are actually the easiest thing to discipline around. Maybe the equivalent, the only other thing I could say is even easier or as easy to discipline around is treats like dessert, because both of these things are not good for our kids. And when they don't have them, they're way more regulated children. Our families run more harmoniously. Everything is better. But for some reason, we spend all of this time trying to figure out this way to deliver them to our kids. But when you actually think about it, taking away treats, taking away dessert, taking away screens, it's the easiest thing. Everything else we have to discipline around, it actually has to be in our children's lives, like healthy growing food, for example, schoolwork, for example, stuff with friends, toys, like all of the things that we are disciplining around as parents. These are things where we have to try to find a balance around them because they're really important and healthy things to have in your life. friendships, sibling dynamics, sleep, everything, brushing your teeth, like all of the things that you come to me and you need help getting traction on and disciplining your children around, they're all things that like the solution isn't going to be, well, just take your kid's toothbrush away or no more toothbrushing. Of course, that's not going to happen. But screens and dessert like treats, those are things that you can just literally get rid of in your family. It's not necessary for your kids to have them, and it's totally not a problem. It's not something that you're trying to figure out how to navigate and keep it present, except we are. So I want to point it out to you. Number one, your kid's only going to, like, the less screen time your kid has, the better. Number two, this is actually super easy. It's our brains that make it hard, but it's actually like the easiest thing to discipline around. Just get rid of it. It's like such a no brainer. And three, that we as parents have very unrealistic expectations on our children for how they should behave around screens. It's not fair for us to expect kids to, for example, manage their own screen time, to not get upset when they lose screen time, to not get upset or have that like reentry transition period when screens turn off. Like, we are putting them in a position where we're scrambling their circuitry, at literally giving them a drug and then getting very upset with them when they behave like drug addicts, when they behave like someone who is dealing with scrambled circuitry. That's what they're dealing with. And so they're absolutely going to behave like somebody who is having a really hard time. Their brain's not working properly quite yet. That transition time is a real thing, and it's not fair for us to expect that not to be it. Now, for some kids, that transition time is like 30 seconds. That's cool, but the same is true for me and you. Like, when you are binging Netflix and then you put your phone down or your whatever down, you don't just immediately instantaneously come back to reality. It probably takes you a minute or two, right? So this is what I want us to be thinking about when we come up with plans and approaches to screen time. The real challenge around screens isn't just that our kids are addicted to it, but that we're addicted to it too. And we start to fall into the false belief that disciplining around screens is going to be just a huge nightmare. It's not possible. If we limit screens, our kids are going to be totally, dysregulated. That's actually the opposite is true. The opposite is true. Your kid is going to be more regulated when you limit screens. And we also fall into this idea that, like, well, if my kid doesn't have screens, then they don't have anything to do. And now I have to figure out what they're going to do in the meantime. Like, not true at all. Your child being left to their own devices and idle time. I know we always say idle time is the devil's workshop or whatever. That's that old fashioned expression. Like, idle time is really great. It forces our children to be creative. They come up with ideas that they haven't done. They explore projects and activities that they wouldn't have explored before. Like, all of the reasons why we hesitate to discipline around screens, like, that's the real work. Like, you don't actually need someone to tell you whether or not screens are good. We've already covered that. We don't need even someone necessarily to tell you, like, well, what should the rules around screen time be? You get to decide that. You get to decide, do your kids get screen time before school? Do your kids get screen time every day of the week? You decide all of those things. The real problem that we have around disciplining around screens is all of the crazy mental gymnastics that we go through of believing that it's going to make our lives worse, that it's going to make our kids crazy, that it's going to put a ton of extra work on us because we have to entertain them, that we're limiting their social life. That's another one I hear. Well, but all their friends are playing video games online, and how's he going to connect with his friends? Yeah, maybe he will see those friends differently or interact with those friends differently, and he'll also probably make new friends, or she, or whatever. So putting all of that stuff out there, I have two suggestions for you. Don't take my word for it. Suggestion number one is don't take my word for it. Did you guys ever watch a Reading Rainbow? I'm dating myself right now because there's probably a million parents out there that are much younger than I am and never had Reading Rainbow because it didn't exist. But when I was a kid, we had Reading Rainbow. And one of the things they did at the end was talk about book recommendations, and they would always say, but don't take my word for it, go to the library, blah blah blah. Don't take my word for it. Do not take my word for it that your kid's dysregulation or aggression or arguing, argumentativeness, power struggles. Like, don't take my word for it that those things will improve without screens. Prove it to yourself. My suggestion for you is to just not even a whole week, do like a 72-hour even detox from screens, all screens, and just see what happens. You will be flabbergasted. There's very little that I can guarantee, like, this is definitely going to improve things in your family. This is one of those things that I would put money on the fact that not only will things improve, but that you will be blown away by how quickly things improve in your family. Things that have nothing to do with screens. I mean, obviously, the arguing about screens will go away because screens are not something we should argue about because it's not an option. But I'm telling you, stuff that has nothing to do with screens, like siblings getting along, people being pleasant at dinner, people getting their homework done, like just everything in your home environment will change if you do a screen detox. I used to say try a week without screens. I know that that's hard. So 3 days, 4 days, just prove it to yourself. So that's my first suggestion. My second suggestion is come at your rules around screens from this idea that we've been talking about of just like unfair expectations on kids, that screens really enhance dysregulation and aggression sometimes, depending on your kiddo. Dysregulation all the time. Aggression, that depends on the kiddo. But okay, now let's look at screens. And here's my suggestion for you on screened rules. And you absolutely do not have to have these. This is just a starting point, a jumping off place. But I will tell you that limiting screens is going to change your life. So just give it a whirl. In our family, the screen time rules, and like I confessed, I haven't been 100% on them recently, and it needs to change. But the rules in our family, and I've tested these rules out for over a decade, they're very, very, very effective, is no screens during the week, except for sometimes if a parent makes an exception for a family movie night. So no screens during the week. On non-school days, so weekends or holidays or whatever, we can have screens after 4 p.m. and after responsibilities are taken care of. So you get to at 4 p.m. if you have everything on your, responsibility list, chores, homework, whatever, done, you are welcome to have screens. And then on weekends, you also can have screens in the morning. That's the rules in our house. And how much screen time is it? Okay, after 4 o'clock, you get 2 hours of screen time. And if you're in the morning time, it's before 10 a.m., you're allowed to have 1 hour of screens. Those are the rules in our house, which means that my kids never have screens before school, which means we never have to fight with an iPad or whatever to be out the door. My kids get ready all by themselves without screens, and it's great. This is not me bragging. I'm not like a better parent than you. I promise. I just don't have screens making my life harder in the morning. That's the only difference. So my kids don't have screens in the mornings unless it's a weekend and we're not going anywhere. My kids always have their stuff done before they have screens, which means that every single day, because my kids love to have screens, of course, every single day that's a screen day means also that's a day where their chores are going to get done, their bedrooms are going to get clean, their homework is going to get finished, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last thing I will say about this is any system is only as good as your enforcement of that system. And here's why I make such a big emphasis about like screens are the easiest thing to discipline around. All you have to do is take them away. You don't have to figure out a way for them to coexist. So the most important thing is whatever screen rules you come up with, that you enforce them. That means actually going, like, I have to go into my son's room and say, oh, looks like you're having your screen time. I kind of do a little scan to see, oh, cool, you've gotten everything done. And then I always also say, do you have a timer set? Because how do I know if he's having 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, unless I'm hovercraft micromanaging him? And so remember how I said that I was going to transition into older children? This is it. And it doesn't have to be that old. My youngest is 9, not super, super old, but he's old enough that he knows without talking to me, with whether it's 4 o'clock or not, he knows without talking to me what he needs to get done in order to have screens. He knows without talking to me that he needs to set a timer on whatever device he's using so that he makes sure that he complies with the 2-hour rule. And he knows that if I come and find him having screen time and he hasn't ticked all of those boxes, it's before 4 o'clock, he hasn't done his checklist, he doesn't have a timer set, screen time is over and we'll try again tomorrow. And that's what I want you to know is the most important thing, is finding that whatever courage or commitment to actually enforcing your rules is the magical secret key to all things with screens and with everything, with every boundary we set with our kids. Like, it's the mental gymnastics that we are doing, telling ourselves that we really can't take screens away, that is stopping us from actually creating a system and enforcing that system. And if nothing else, I want this episode to help you believe that it's better without screens so that you maybe at least have this idea of like, maybe I'll give it a try, and to get over those mental gymnastics to believe that you actually really, really can do that. You can take screens away. You can limit screens. You absolutely can. If this is like, yes, I know I need this, and also I cannot do this by myself, this feels really, really hard and big, I get it. Here I am. I'm the parent coach and I have let things slip. So my son is still doing an amazing job doing everything on his checklist, and he doesn't have screens before 4 o'clock, but he does have screens during the week. And that is a huge difference from what it was like for my older children. And I blame the pandemic, but ultimately I have to blame myself. It is on me to move that, walk that back to what it was pre-pandemic, and I haven't done it. So I totally get that it's really, really hard. And I really encourage you not to try to do this stuff on your own if you really feel that way. There's no reason why you have to do this stuff in isolation. No matter what your budget is, no matter, what your challenges are, there are ways for you to get help from me. And if you're not setting up that discovery call for yourself, which is free, you are the one that's holding you back. Just like I'm trying to blame the pandemic, but it's really on me. Like, it's on us to really take advantage of this stuff. And there's absolutely nothing holding you back or getting in the way of setting up that time to sit down with me and tell me what's going on and get my feedback and hear the roadmap that we can kind of create together to the parenting dynamic that you wish you had, the goals that you have. I'm not joking when I say that the parenting relationship and connection of your dreams is possible with your children. And I want to hear what that is. I want to hear what your vision is, and I want to help you achieve it. So set that call up for yourself. I'm here for you, and I can't wait to talk to you again next week. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.